kicking off this week's podcast with a review and recap of this week's episode of The Last of Us on HBO, which of course we started off with last week, recapping that series premiere and providing our overall thoughts about everything that we saw. Again, as we noted last week, this is a series that was highly anticipated by you and I in particular, because we are fans of the video game, and fans of the video game worldwide. We're very eager to see what that premiere episode was going to look like. And I would just have to say it seemed to be a success across the board. We saw a lot of the early reviews, which pretty much praised the entire season for being so faithful to the game, but also making really smart adjustments and adaptations for the small screen. But now we actually have some raw numbers, and it looks like that this show is just by far and away a huge success. And before we talk about our thoughts on this week's episode, I just quickly want to, sort of discuss that and just discuss the success that they've had in the past week. So that premiere episode on the premiere night drew 4.7 million viewers, and it's the second most watched premiere for an HBO original series since Boardwalk Empire. So that's like 13 years that it had the second most watched viewership, only behind House of the Dragon, which premiered in the middle of last year. Also, after just 2 days, episode 1, the series premiere, did garner more than 10 million views. And now we just got numbers right before starting this show that episode 2 received 5.7 million viewers across HBO and HBO Max, which represents a 22% increase from last week, and it marks the largest week 2 audience growth for an HBO original drama series in its entire history. They've never had such a big jump from week to week for one of their original series to be such a large number. But not only is the show having tremendous success, we're also seeing the video game have a lot of success as well, and video game sales have risen for The Last of Us. So the part 1 re-release that was dropped on the PS5 this past fall, that's jumped up 238% in sales over in the UK. And then the remastered version, which is available on the PS4 and also available on the PS5, that rose 322% in the UK. So just across the board, both the game and the series are just having really remarkable success right now. Are you at all surprised by this? What do these numbers signal to you? And just, what's your overall outlook at how this is performing right now?
Oh, I'm not surprised one bit. I don't think, I remember when even Last of Us Part 2 was coming out, I remember it actually surpassing, I think, God of War at the time for like the fastest selling PlayStation exclusive. I think it was PS4 at the time when it came out. And it was like, well, I can see why, but man, this game is just obviously and clearly, I think, a force to be reckoned with, man. And we've talked about so much about the progression of games and in how The Last of Us is part of the reason so easy to adapt, because it's video games are now playable moves and things like that, man. So I can see how they would complement each other, right? How the show would complement the game, and the game would complement the show as they both continue to rise over time, man. I can only imagine the people who were holding off on that first episode because they just didn't know how to feel yet. They heard the word of mouth from that first episode and couldn't help themselves, right? Went into it, watched that first episode, caught up with the second, and here they are with this rise in numbers, man. So I'm not surprised at all. I think there's probably even more room for both to grow. And it's interesting that the UK, I think, is the sales that's growing the most here. I think that's something I would like to explore. Why exactly is it the UK in particular that's getting the numbers like this? But man, in terms of the popularity of The Last of Us, the show that we've seen so far, the way they're complimenting each other is just no surprise at all. And so I can't wait to see what it continues to do.
I gotta say, I'm a little taken aback just by the large amount of the numbers. I mean, 10 million viewers in 2 days for that series premiere. That's not small at all. That's a really huge number, especially for something that's on, premium cable network, but also on streaming as well. And yes, we know the video game is super successful, but that doesn't always translate in terms of viewership that'll turn up for a movie or a TV series. But it's just clear and indicative to me that HBO's move to release all of the episodes to critics early to allow for that word of mouth to get out and spread in the way that it did over the past few weeks was brilliant, because they made all 9 episodes available to critics early. And that just shows a huge sign of confidence on their part that they had something really special on their hands, because you don't want to send out an entire season's worth of work and then it get hammered because now you've lost potential audience you would gain. So they knew that they had something that was going to be really special. And not only that, once that word of mouth did get out, it just further increased over time. And of course, once us as viewers just got a chance to look at it, that also created this really huge, sort of momentum shift in terms of how many people were going to watch it in the second and third day. And then now coming into week 2 to see the viewership has only increased is just, it's phenomenal. It's really nothing to be sneezed at. And it just goes to show that people are trying to play the game simultaneously with watching the show, which I'm sure is like a really cool experiment. I would love to know from the creators on YouTube who upload the cutscenes from these video games. I want to know if their YouTube channel viewership shot up, because it probably did for people who might not
Most
be
likely,
and they want to just see the cutscenes, the cinematic version of it. I'm sure that they saw an increase in traffic as well. So it just represents just across the board, what's the saying? A rising tide raises all ships. That's exactly what this is. The show is doing well, which means every other medium can do well in addition to that. But let's get into the episode, talk about it. Before we do spoilers and dive into the deep specifics of everything that happened this week, just want to start off with your general big picture thoughts, especially after, really that firing shot from the opening series premiere last week, which was so impactful. And I know we both praised it. What overall did you think about this follow-up episode in episode 2?
Man, I love how they also continued to give us another context at the beginning of this episode. I really am enjoying these openings to these episodes. So I was really glad to see, them continue it in this episode, man. I think this episode shows us that they're not here to mess around with this TV show at all. There's a sense of urgency that the world of The Last of Us has. And I in making a game into a TV show, a lot of people I think expect there to be, I think, a little bit more patience. Like, oh, we can. In some ways, it's the other way around, because a video game, you get 20 hours. Technically, if we know there's going to be 8 episodes of this,
9.
That means 9 episodes of this. That's like 9 hours. If you round it to 9 hours, and so I think that sense of urgency is very important. Not only because you have a story to tell, but because that's how it feels when you're playing the game too. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's things that you can do in the game that you have to do in the game that you don't, have to do in the TV show. And so I love that they're giving it the TV show the push that it needs in order to feel like there's some stuff that needs to go down. And so I feel like every episode something's going to go down. Like, that's how Last of Us works. That's how the game worked. And I feel like that's how this TV show is working. And so I have to give them praise, I think, just for the second episode, and them saying, no, we have things to do and we're going to do them and we're going to get through them. And they do. They get through them very much so, man. It ends how I thought it would end. Things happen in it that I thought would happen in it. And I'm very glad of everything that went down. I have to praise Anna Torv, man, for the performance she had in this episode. She killed it. She came in and did what she had to do. And I'm very glad that they picked her as Tess, man. I couldn't have really asked for anybody else at this point, because she did an amazing job. But it made it amazing 1-2 punch, I think, in terms of episodes go, man. And I'm glad where we are. I think they're doing a tremendous job.
Yeah, I got to say, I love this episode. It was incredible overall. They kept me increasingly excited about everything that's going to be coming in the future. But this is just a great follow-up to really get us firmly comfortable with these characters that we're going to be following for the next few weeks as well, further raising the stakes of the story. And of course, introducing some really, really important elements that we saw in the games now come over and be translated into live action, which was just expertly done. We've been waiting on the infected. We've been waiting on clickers, things of that nature. And when you finally see what these things look like writ large on your television screen, it's like, oh yeah, they nailed that look. They nailed the environments. They nailed the production design, everything that you just can recall back to what we saw in the video game, and then bringing that to life in this TV series was just amazing to see. And I think that this is just overall, so far, these 2 episodes are a masterclass in what an adaptation can really look like, because there is a huge fan base for this property, for this IP, that you want to make sure you're paying tribute to, that you make sure that you can satisfy. But there's a horde of new fans, probably more new fans that haven't played the video game, if we're being honest. I think the majority of people watching this haven't been exposed to that, and you have to appeal to them as well. And so when we look at these things that they did to make some changes and substitute some things and create some additions to what we've already known and learned in the video game, I have no criticisms about it. It all makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's perfectly translated. It works well for the story that they are telling in this show because it will be slightly different than what we're used to. And I think overall, this is how an adaptation should work. This is how you stay faithful, yet still give us something that feels completely new at the same time. So I'm just overall still astounded by the work that's being done here. Really, really impressive stuff across the board. But with that being
Yeah.
said, let's get into the specifics of this week and talk about spoilers. So if you haven't caught up with episode 2 of The Last of Us, this is your official spoiler warning. Go watch the episode and come back and listen to the rest of our conversation. And I do want to start off with that opening prologue because this is now the second week in a row we have got a cold open, which is not a part of the video game at all. But what it is doing is expanding the world of this story that's being told here. And I think
Mm-hmm.
what is working so well about these things is the fact that, yes, in the first episode, it gives us this really foreboding sense of tension, as does this one. But it takes it to a global scale. We go to Jakarta in Indonesia, and we see basically the impetus and the origin point for where this fungus and this pandemic is going to start. And it's a couple of days before Outbreak Day happens, which we witnessed last week. What did you think about just seeing this professor be this expert, learning about the spread of this virus that's essentially going to wipe out so much of humanity, and overall what her reaction was to it, which was probably even more chilling?
Yeah, there's like a level of Last of Us always had this thing where it always felt like the military versus the people on the ground all the time, right? Same way that it's something that kind of feels like Resident Evil is sometimes, how it always feels like the people versus the Umbrella Corporation. And we come into the beginning of this episode, and as soon as she gets picked up by the military, you could tell she feels like did I do something wrong? You know what I mean? Like what's going on here? But turns out, they need her to study this woman that got bit at this factory. And just the level of detail here, I think, is so tremendous, man. The way she has to go into this room and look at this body and make a cut into the bite, and it's like, what is going on? And you see the cordyceps coming out of the mouth of this individual. It's just really scary stuff, bro. To be honest, the scariest thing so far in the show for me is the little stringy things that comes out of people's mouths, because it's weird, man. It's like a phobia of like something looking like that coming out of a person. It looks so good and so well done, but it's also so scary to think that any kind of fungi could look like that and could potentially, we do see it later on in the episode too. So I thought that was important that they kind of open with something like that. And in some ways they kind of close with something like that. So I thought that was interesting too. What also I think makes it so important is, like you said, it ties into what happened in the first episode so well, how we realized that Sarah and Joel almost got infected numerous times because of the flour that they were using or they were about to use. Joel didn't end up getting the cake. The neighbors are making cookies one day, and Sarah was like, I don't want one of those. Like, I love little details like that, to where we're just seeing, kind of these things go back and forth of what, could have been, but what never ended up happening, man. The face that she makes is like, it's crazy as someone who is, a mycologist, right, who studies fungi. And she's like, there is no hope. Bomb everything. Like, what are you saying to me right now? There is no cure. The face that she makes, it was 10 out of 10, to be honest. I thought it was some tremendous acting. I thought it was very well done. It scared me. Like, I knew what was going down, but like, to be able to see the fear in someone's eyes like that. She was shaking. She couldn't drink her tea. She had to put the cup on the table. I thought it was really well done. It was really scary, I think, to see somebody have that much fear in their hearts. And she was like, just take me home to my family, because I can't do this type thing. So it was really good, man.
This is why you hired Craig Mazin, who is so just expertly gifted at doing stuff like this. We saw a lot of this in Chernobyl, just the side effects or the reactions of people to just the horrific things that they're watching unfold and the information that they're getting. And you can see somebody process that, especially an expert in their field, And that just becomes so horrific as an audience to watch that, because we've now trusted this person to be a leading expert, to have all of the knowledge of information. And when they essentially have no hope in their eyes, that gives us no reason to have any hope either. And to see her reaction to everything, it's like, yeah, this is pretty much over. You have to bomb this city. And then ultimately we find out later that bombing, which is what they did do, doesn't even work. Like, it only worked for some cities that they bombed. But this was such a fast growing pandemic, and this infection was spreading so rapidly that the bombing essentially was ill-advised at best. That was kind of the last resort in which they would try to contain the spread, but it didn't really do anything. But this is where a medium like television just excels. You can't really have these moments in a video game. A video game is all about being in the point of view of whoever the main central character is. And you don't really have those opportunities to go and watch another character and what they're doing. We couldn't go to Jakarta in the video game and witness like what an expert would say. I mean, maybe they could have included a cutscene, but again, I think that this is why you hire somebody like a Craig Mazin to come in and bring this new perspective to say, let's globalize this. Let's really show like this is a worldwide thing already. And it's happening super, super fast. We can't even prepare for it because this person has already said like, 14 people in a bread factory, essentially, which is like the perfect place for something like this to spread. Like, she's like, yeah, it's already kind of over. We've sailed way beyond the point of trying to contain this. We have to do something that is almost unthinkable at this point. And it's just so scary to realize that. And we know ultimately that is what they did do. They had to basically resort towards almost human extinction to make sure that they can contain this as much as possible. But I do want to get into also just the fact that this show, not just from a story perspective, but also from a visual aesthetic perspective, is really, really faithful to everything we saw in the video games as well. Last week, we talked a lot about the zombie influence on The Last of Us as a video game, but of course, this television series and just the landscape of where that is in popular culture right now. But equally as important to the zombie landscape is the fact that this is a post-apocalyptic story. It's taking place 20 years after Outbreak Day occurred. And so we see basically the last remnants of human civilization, and they are on their heels. It seems like we're going to be wiped out very soon, because this infection is just, it continues to grow and it continues to consume every city and every person that it comes across. But in this episode, we get outside, we get within the city, we can see all of the cars stacked up on the freeway. We see how nature has really overtaken civilization. Nature has grown into the buildings, the greenery, everything is just really overtaking the environment. And I just got to shout out that the production crew here is just doing some really incredible work. You can tell HBO spent a lot of money on this show. I think I even read a report the past week that this one season cost more money than the first 5 seasons of Game of Thrones combined. Now it's more than total budget. And we know Game of Thrones eventually got a really, really huge budget as it progressed, but that just goes to show the bet that they're placing on this. And I think it reflects in what we saw in this episode, because we did go to so many different environments. What did you think about just, sort of the translated look of how things appeared here versus how we're, sort of typically used to seeing them in the video game?
What a tremendous job, I think, being done by the production team here, man. It's one thing, I think, to adapt the way something looks, but it's another thing. I feel like they're excelling at it currently right now, man. It looks so good. It's not to take away from any video game production designers like that, but it's a different, I think, beast to tackle when you not only have to emulate something, but then shoot it on a big screen. You know what I mean? To make it look the way they make it look I think is very impressive. The coloring of everything here is so beautiful. The greenery, the greens look good. Again, it's something they, of course, do in a video game, but to make it translate to TV it's just really something else. And they're doing such a good job here. I'm very curious. I can't wait to see like a documentary, I think, that completes, how they went in to do some of these things. Of course, at the end of this episode, we do get something into the clickers that we see later in this episode, but they don't really tell us so much about how they decided, to copy and paste or design what it will look like. So I actually can't wait to see some of that stuff come to the forefront and see how they got there and what their production designers, what process they went through to bring some of this stuff to life, man. It really does look gorgeous in a lot of different ways, especially when we do get, I think, to the hotel and you're like, okay, this looks crazy. Like, there is still a limitation of video games, as amazing as they are now, is the way things look. Now we get to see them in live action and see I don't know, the realism of some things, and it just looks it just looks good, man. The color grading's good. The way the water even looked in the hotel was good. It was like a perfect kind of green that I can't really explain. I was like, but no, this looks fire. Like they're really putting everything, I think, into the little details, and I think it's what is going to make this such a special adaptation at the end of the day, man. Is that they care. The amount of care is there, and I really love to see it. So yeah, can't wait to see what we know, some more crazy set pieces down the line, some more things that Last of Us has to do, but I can't wait to see what some of those things look like as well.
Yeah, the technical wizardry is just it's kind of off the charts, especially from a TV production, which I think we're kind of used to now at this point in time. TV series having bigger budgets, they are sort of akin to a lot of big budget movies these days when you look at the Star Wars series or the Marvel series. But we can't take this for granted that we're just getting this on a weekly basis, something that looks this spectacular on the small screen. And as you said, you have to take it a step further than what we saw in a video game, because these actors have to walk in these environments. They have to play off of these things, and the combination of practical stuff that they're doing versus the visual effects stuff that they're doing is just it's really awe-inspiring. I would love to see the behind the scenes of the visual effects team. How did they make this decision?
Exactly.
What influenced that? And like you said, what did they pick up directly from the game, but how do you also enhance it to make sure that it does look as well as it can on a television screen? This week's episode is entitled Infected, which is it's so aptly titled. A lot of the prologue really sort of set that up, but one of the big focuses I think that happened this week is sort of establishing the rules of what it means to be infected in this world, which again, if you've not played the video game, it is a little bit different here. They made some changes and made some quick distinctions as to who's infected, how they communicate, how these things really work. And we also got the introduction of the clickers in this episode too. Now, in last week's episode, we talked about the removal of spores, which in the game was sort of the airborne element. That was one of the ways that a person could be affected. If they breathed in enough spores, that could ultimately infect their immune system and they would become infected. They took that out of the show, and it appears that they didn't necessarily do it because of maybe an actor choice to keep their faces on screen. But I think that they made a substitution here, which I got to say, for me, is more frightening. And it's the fact that the cordyceps and how they communicate with all infected is one of those scientific explanations in which, if you wake up a cordyceps, in one location, the bacteria and the chemical nature of them can speak to another cordyceps, maybe a mile away. It can really communicate on those types of long distances, meaning if they're infected, a certain amount of people in one location, you make enough noise, then you're going to wake up another zombie horde elsewhere, way down the line that you certainly didn't anticipate. And when they introduced that element in the middle of the episode, but then paid it off in the end, I couldn't have saw that coming. I couldn't have saw that as a way that they would have really expanded upon the lore of what we know about these infected. But how did you react to seeing that moment, especially towards the end of this episode, where it's like, yeah, Joel shot an infected person just to protect themselves in the moment, but that created probably the worst repercussion possible and woke up maybe like 300 other infected people who were, maybe hundreds of feet away from the museum at that point.
Yeah, it feels like they're doubling down on the environment of it all, on the way things work of it all, the science of it all, man. They're bringing in scientists into the show now. For episode 1, we bring in scientists. At being in episode 2 now, they show us this scientist who's talking about fungi, and now they're like, okay, how do we connect this even more so into the struggle that we're going through with these characters? And they make this small change. I don't even know if I can consider it small, because in some ways it's nuts. We've never heard of anything like this in any quote unquote zombie kind of material. This is a very new thing. That's really cool though. And it also connects to it even expands on the way clickers work, right? We know clickers work off echolocation. That's why they click. You know what I'm saying? That's how. And now it's like, you're telling me the environment is similar to that. The fungi that exist on the earth is very similar to that, where you could touch one small particle in a freaking vine or something that's sitting on the ground, and a whole nother horde might come your way. It is crazy that they decided to go with this, but it also makes a ton of sense. But more than anything, I can't wait to see how many other ways that they use this. Like, of course, they use it in this episode with Tess, and I was like, oh yeah, this is crazy. Joel, I don't know what y'all gonna do about this, like later on down the line, but it's I think it also made sense because as soon as they come out of the QZ into the real world, Ellie is like, okay, but this is kind of empty. Like we thought people were swarming. You know what I mean? We thought the streets were crazy. But now it's like you can barely step anywhere. You can barely touch anything. You can barely move around the way you want to move, or else, it's a whole nother ball game of infected knocking at your door. And I really do love that change, man. I think it's a win across the board because it again just gives them something else to mess with down the line. I also kind of like the idea that if part of this being in this outbreak is environmental, is us not taking care of the earth, are these people not taking care of the earth? Now you can't really walk the earth for free. You know what I mean? Now there's a problem. Now the earth is kind of fighting back. And I really love that idea too, as a theme. So I think it's a great job across the board.
Yeah, I think overall it makes that connection between human and nature all the more apparent, which a piece of that is in the game, but they're really, really honing in on that with this show because this is essentially like a mushroom network. Mushrooms in real life, they utilize tendrils and networks to communicate with each other. But now we're seeing it here with these infected, like literally the tendrils, as you said, they're just so frightening because they can creep and crawl into any crevice anywhere, under your fingernail, behind your eye socket, within the ground, as Tess said, through the wiring of things that we see under the ground, through tree vines, anything essentially. Like it's pretty much it's pretty much no limit to it, which is almost not fair. I mean, if this was in the video game, it might be the hardest video game ever because, like you said, you could just lift a foot and you're going to wake up somebody. And so in this show, the way that they'll continue to utilize this will be interesting to see how much more of an obstacle it'll become. But I think again that combination and that connection between man and nature, and the fact that these infected people, I guess we can call them people still, maybe, are just so connected to each other. It's not really just about the individual anymore. They speak to each other in a language that we can't even communicate with. And I think a lot of that was seen in that final shot before Tess ultimately did demise in this episode. But just really, really fascinating stuff. And again, I think it really makes it a lot more frightening. The clickers was the big piece of this. I think the big central focus of this episode. There was an entire set piece which introduced us to the clickers. We have seen infected already, obviously, even with Outbreak Day, but we know that these creatures, they eventually advance, and if you become a clicker, well, you've been infected for quite some time, probably years at that point, because you've been able to just walk around, but this infection has spread so far throughout your brain that it's also expanding outside of your skin. It's taken over their eyes, and it's now it's basically become like a mushroom flower that sits on top of their face. And so we know that they can't see technically, but their hearing abilities are far advanced. And so we get that entire piece in the middle of this episode in which Joel, Ellie, and Tess have to fight for their lives within this museum and not make a sound. And it was absolutely frightening. And it definitely replicated one of those big sequences in the video game where we first came across the clickers. But I think what they did a lot here was build up that tension and really, really hone in on the idea that, man, you don't want to fuck with these because they might not be able to see you, but they are ravenous. They run, they flail their arms around, they're pretty much unstoppable. And it's even harder to kill them with because of that protection that they have outside of their faces. So the big obstacle. What did you think about just that whole sequence and how much tension was really behind everything that was happening in that moment?
Man, one of the things I really like about clickers, I think, is how fast they are. You compare a little bit to The Walking Dead and see how like the zombies kind of remain the same, throughout the series. But it is things like clickers, I think, that keep people on their toes. Yes, of course they can't see you, but it's how hard it is not to make a sound. Like Joel stepped on like a piece of glass and that was it. It was
Ellie
like the
breathed, and that's what kicked
Ellie
everything off.
Like, what is going on here? Like, and they will sprint. I've only seen a couple like faster zombies, right? And I Am Legend, technically they're vampires, right? But they're fast as hell. Like World War Z, of course, those are crackhead zombies. And then like Dawn of the Dead, I don't know what's up with them zombies. Them zombies be sprinting, but those are like some examples of zombies that are just really fast. But clickers they're so treacherous, man. Like I've never seen, to me, they feel like the kind of infected or the kind of zombie that just wants to bite your face off. Like, it's just, I've never seen them anything quite like that, I think. But it's really what makes them so scary. The way they look, man, the way they sound is crazy. I don't think you can replicate it, man. But they do such a good job of bringing that to the real world here, man. And I think that in itself, the way they look and the way they sound, the way they click is such a good way to build up tension. I think in moments like that, man, especially a lot of us who did play the game are like, oh shoot, what's about to go down? What's happening? It's anybody can die at any time. Anybody can catch an L at any time. Again, as we see, Tess gets got, like it just happens. And that's how easy that it can happen. Shoot, Ellie gets bit. You know what I'm saying? Of obviously we know, at this point that she's immune, but Ellie gets bit. It's like, dang, you tell me out of that whole ordeal, 2 people got bit and we kind of really didn't see it. You know what I'm saying? It happened that fast and that quick. These infected are not a game. This is not a game. So I think they do such a good job of not only, again, showing us how scary it is, but really in a lot of ways giving us some rules here, showing us Joel push over a statue to make sure the clickers can hear and run in a different direction, showing us that Joel missed. It felt like the video game. The man missed the headshot. Like, it happens. I could relate absolutely him missing the headshot. It happens, and sometimes you might have to pay. He got into a whole scuffle with the clicker because of that. But I think, again, overall, man, it's good tension because of the way that they built these creatures, I think, and the way that they made this game that you have to sneak around and listen. It's like, dang, you really can't make a mistake or else that's it for you. So it's scary, man. They build a scary world, and I like it.
Yeah, even the buildup before seeing the clickers was frightening, because you get the shot of that guy who had been attacked, and Ellie and Joel and Tess are looking at him like, that couldn't have been infected that did that. This looks way, way worse. And us who played the video game, we're like, yeah, we know it's worse because the clickers behind this are just ridiculously strong and savage. And, like you said, they are looking to really end you in a moment's notice. And then the walk up the steps and you just see the fungal virus that's spread, and it's taken over the walls of the museum, and you can see the human heads that are a part of it. I mean, again, just the production design, I'm like, this shit is so scary. Like, if you saw this in real life, just really think about how fucking terrifying that would be to see something like that that just spreads and they connect and everything becomes one. It's like roots of a tree. And then ultimately we get the shot of the infected. And what's always been crazy about the clickers, even in the game, the design of them, yes, it's terrifying, but it's also like weirdly beautiful as well, because it is like a mushroom flower and there's colors, and it looks really well formed. But these are the worst creatures possible. I just love the fact that they decided to use real people to shoot this, and that these weren't just like CGI creations. They talked about in the podcast that they got some fans of the video game to come in and do the motions and the movements, probably people who've cosplayed as clickers in the past.
Dancers, though, they're doing a great job.
Yeah, it's like some actual choreography that they had to definitely like have and really emulate those movements and motions that we know. And then of course the sound is equally as important that they make, which is just bone chilling. It sends goosebumps down your spine when you hear the clickers and just like what they sound like. So just incredible stuff across the board, and really executing the scene in the perfect way and making them the perfect threat for the rest of the series. Of course, you talked about Tess earlier and just the importance that she had in this episode. She does ultimately sacrifice herself, which she had already been infected, so she was going to die either way. But she makes a big sacrifice to make sure that Joel and Ellie can move on and continue their journey. And I think that it's really a testament to the character's development here and how they expanded on it in the video game, which a lot of the same stuff happens. But what I noticed here is the fact that we see a Tess who has a little bit more hope and optimism in this whole project than Joel has. We know Joel is super skeptical. He does not want to really do this mission. He's only doing it for personal gain. But Tess, I think she realizes in the moment that Ellie was bit, and also the moment that she was bit, like, hey, this is a real thing. She's really immune. There really might be a shot here. And Joel, I know you. I know your history. I know what you've been through, and I know how dark shit has been for the past 20 years. we have a shot here to right all of these wrongs, because a lot of what's said and not shown is the fact that both Tess and Joel have really sketchy histories, especially together. The 20-year time lapse that we never see in the video games or even in the series is it's often meant to reflect that these two have killed people. They've done so for personal gain. They've obviously done it for survival as well, but they've had to make some really, really tough decisions. And so they're both kind of in these really broken places with each other. And I think that that's partially why they're attracted to each other. But Tess, again, she makes this huge, huge sacrifice to make sure that that journey can continue, and that Joel can also hopefully have some sort of moment of redemption, some moment of legacy, so that his entire existence isn't painted by the death of Sarah, the death of his daughter, and just everything that happened after that. What did you think about just how they utilized Tess here, and just those moments that, again, replicated the video game, but also some of the enhancements that they made to further advance her character in the story?
Yeah, what I'm hearing through word of mouth is people like the way this Tess went out a little bit more than video game Tess. Video game Tess went out actually pretty very similarly, except for they were being chased by the military instead of, they weren't being chased by the infected. But I think I love, pretty much everything you brought up, man, how Tess really is in the moment. There's like hope in her eyes now. There's like Ellie has given her a new sense of redemption of what her fight is. It's no longer, thing isn't for personal gain anymore. It's not to get this truck that was promised. It's really to get Ellie where she needs to go, to these fireflies, so that she can set things right for all that she did. And I think that that's important for her character in this moment. And I feel like Tess went out in a way where she even feels like she came to a conclusion with what I did was good in that moment. What I did was the righteous in that moment. But Joel, he's still such of a shell casing of the man that he once was 20 years ago. He still is not the same guy that he was. He's still at the, middle of last episode threw a child into a fire who was infected. He still beat a cop to death. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? He's still very much the guy, like you said, he still very much is a skeptic. He very much is, all right, Ellie, if you twitch once, you're getting shot in the face. You know what I mean? Type dude. He's like, I don't know what's going on here, but I felt like in that moment he still trusted Tess more than he trusted anything else that was going on around him. He was listening. They had been through so much. One thing that this episode does do different too is they give Ellie and Joel, I think, a moment to kind of talk, but he refused to really tell Ellie if like him and Tess were a thing. Like we really don't know. It's really hard to read between the lines too in that moment, but you could tell they've been through so much together that I think it pays off in that moment where she's like, please just go save the girl. And so I really like everything that Anna Torvin was doing here, man. And unfortunately, she went through like the grossest kiss in TV history. Because man, it had my skin crawling, whatever the hell was going on there. But it was still a good sacrifice. It was still really good to see Tess go out like a G, man, because she does so in the video game as well, man. So I enjoyed pretty much everything coming out of there.
Yeah, I think the change from having the Phaedra offices running after them to making it the infected makes total sense just within the context of what this episode is. It's really about the infected and getting properly introduced to them and how dangerous they are. And so I think it makes the most sense, especially with the forward progression of where they were in that journey and where they were along the way of going in the museum and in the rotunda, where Tess ultimately lost her life. But yeah, it is one of those things that you have to look at Joel's reaction to this whole scenario as much of a important factor as well, because I don't think that Joel ever opened up his heart to Tess in the way that she probably did for him, because she looked at him in that final moment and said, like, I never asked you to be anything for me. I never asked you to do what I did for you. And I think that just is sort of really symbolic of the fact that she loves him for sure. And I think deep down, Joel loves her as well. We can see it on his face, but he couldn't love her the way that she loved him because he's closed himself off to everything. His heart is just so dark and hardened after the death of his daughter. He hasn't allowed himself to reach a place like that. So when Ellie asks him about that earlier in the episode, he's just like, I can't even go there and talk about that. That's that piece of me is just compartmentalized and completely shut off. Like I won't even allow myself
Mhm.
to open up in that manner, nonetheless to a child that I've only known for a couple of days. And so when Tess ultimately does sacrifice herself and we see Joel interact with Ellie at the end of the episode and just kind of walk off, it feels like he's still sort of blaming her for that. Like he gives her a bit of a look like, this shit wouldn't have happened if you weren't along for the way for this journey. Like we wouldn't even be in any of this if it weren't for you. And I feel like that he still is sort of in disbelief. Like maybe a part of him
Mhm.
is really sort of, buying into the idea that she is immune, but a little slither of him still feels like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here. This might be the biggest mistake that I ever make. But ultimately, we will see, I think, ultimately a big change and a paradigm shift that he has with this relationship that he has with Ellie. Before we wrap up here, I forgot to bring this up last week. I want to quickly ask you, now that we've gotten 2 episodes and we kind of have a feel for the pacing of this show, do you think that they're going to get to the entire game in this first season? We don't really know. They haven't made that
Mm.
clear that yes, the first game's conclusion will be the final episode of this season, and then season 2 will be part 2 of that video game. We don't really know that.
Mhm.
All we know is that this game is being adapted, the part 1 of the game, and then also the Left Behind will be included in this first season. But could you see a scenario where they find a different ending point and then maybe resume later with the rest of the game in another season? How do you think that that's all going to shake out? Because it feels like it's a little bit difficult to tell at this point.
Yeah, it is. It is hard to tell right now. In my mind, the way things are shaking out is I feel like an episode they're going character to character. Of course, we know they're named something else. Like you said, this is named Infected. In my mind, this episode could also be named Test. You know what I'm saying? I feel like at some point we're gonna get to the Bill and Frank stuff. I think that's another episode. I think the Left Behind stuff could be another episode. I don't know. Right now, it feels like it's character driven to me, or the people that we meet along the way, in that they each serve their own chapter. I think if they do it that way, then there is potential. I don't know. It's again, it's really hard to tell because pacing a video game from a TV show is just so different. You could even skip some stuff if you really want to, you know what I mean? But we do know some of the things that are coming. So I think it's possible for them to stop, to find a place to stop. I mean, it's Last of Us. There's always more story, I think, to tell, or there's always something else, another spot that they can stop and be like, no, this is it. My worry though is if they stop somewhere specific, they won't have enough just to finish the first game. You know what I mean? They won't have. There will be too much time on their hands. There'll only be like 3 episodes left in order for them to get there. So I feel like they're going to find a way to get there to the end of the first game just in this season. I don't know how. It is a lot more to cover. 7 episodes is a lot, though. I think, given what we've already been through and what we have to go, I think they can do it. But I think next episode will be even telling to see how these first 3 go versus the 9 overarching. I think will tell me a lot. So even I think it'll be an even better question next week after we see what they decide to put in next week's episode.
Yeah, well, next week definitely is Bill and Frank for sure, based off of the
Mhm.
preview. So I think that I agree. I think that will tell us a lot. If I had to guess, I think they're finishing the game in this season because they
Mhm.
could find a different place to stop, but as you said, you don't really have enough runway left to finish out the story unless you would choose to embellish a lot and add in a lot of creative stuff, which they've
Right.
already said that they don't plan to do. They are pretty much sticking to the story of the games with enhancements here and there, as we've already seen. So I do think that the ending of the season will be the ending of the first game. I don't foresee this as a really long project. I don't foresee The Last of Us
Mhm.
being a five season TV series. I
Oh, no,
think
no,
that
no, no,
they're
no.
I think that they're here to do what they need to do and kind of get out. At
Mhm.
most 3, just because the second game is really, really
It's a
long.
lot.
It's a lot in
Second
that
game is a
second
lot.
game. So you could split that up into a couple seasons,
Yeah,
maybe
I
shorten
agree.
seasons, like maybe 8 episodes in one and then 8
Mhm.
episodes in a part 2. I think 3 at most is where they go. The only way that it would be more is if we were to happen to get another game, within the next
Mhm.
couple of years, which is possible. They could do a part 3 in 2 years, and then maybe 6 years down the line we get part 3 adapted into a TV series. But I think for now, with just the makeup of what we have, we'll get 3 seasons at most. But I'll peg it to probably even 2, just to stay really, really faithful to the story. But we will certainly have to see, and we definitely can't wait for next week's episode. So we'll be tuned in. But if you've seen episode 2 of The Last of Us on HBO, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think about it.